An 85-year-old woman is abused and enslaved by her own son. You can't even keep the house in order, he said, pushing her to the ground. Until one day, she started trembling as she saw two policemen knocking at her door. Bella sat in the darkness of her small kitchen, her cold hands resting on the worn wooden table. The clock on the wall showed 7 in the evening, but the house was dim, as empty and somber as always. Her trembling hands tried to hold a spoon, slowly stirring some cold soup in a bowl she had prepared hours earlier. She had barely taken a bite. She had no appetite, and the exhaustion she felt wasn't just physical. It was the fatigue of someone who had endured more than she should have. The sound of the front door slamming shut made Bella jump. It was Richard, her son, who had just come home. Every night, the same routine. Bella felt her body tense just from hearing his heavy footsteps crossing the hallway. Sitting here again? You do nothing all day, but you can't even keep the house in order, were the first words Richard said, without even looking at her, tossing his jacket over a chair as he walked to the fridge. His tone was cold, disdainful, loaded with contempt. Bella didn't respond. It was what she had learned to do over the years. Stay silent, stay out of the way. That had been her way of surviving. Richard's words, which once hurt her deeply, now only left an emptiness. They still hurt, but in a way that made her feel as if she were slowly fading away. Richard opened the fridge, looking for something, and when he didn't find what he wanted, he slammed it shut. There's nothing for dinner? What do you do here all day? Do you think I'm your servant, or what? I'm sorry, Bella murmured softly, barely audible. I thought you wouldn't be home until later. Richard looked at her for the first time, his eyes narrowing, a bitter smile on his face. There was something in his gaze that always made her shrink with fear. That cruel look he used to remind her that he was in control, that she was at his mercy. I don't pay you to think, Richard said, leaning on the table, bending over her. I pay you to clean, cook, and not cause any trouble. Understood. Bella nodded, unable to look him in the eye. She wanted him to leave her alone, but she knew she couldn't say anything that would make him angrier. Richard took a step back, shaking his head in disgust. I'm going out tonight. Make sure everything is clean when I get back. And don't you dare call Lisbeth. You know what happens if you do. The name of her daughter, Lisbeth, echoed in Bella's mind like a distant sound. Lisbeth lived far away, abroad, and it had been years since she had seen her mother in person. Every time Bella tried to call her, Richard would intervene, blocking the calls, deleting messages. The last time she tried, he made sure she never forgot the consequences, a series of days filled with insults and threats. Richard left the kitchen, slamming the door behind him, leaving Bella alone in the dim light with her bowl of cold soup. Silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that leaves a shadow of fear and resignation. Bella slowly stood up from the table, her joints protesting with each movement. She walked to the living room, looking at the old sofa, the faded curtains, the dust gathered on the furniture. This was her home, but it no longer felt like it. It used to be a house full of laughter, of happy family memories, but all that had vanished when Richard started controlling everything. She sat at the edge of the sofa, her nervous hands playing with the folds of her dress. There was something in her chest that weighed her down, something beyond the physical pain she felt every day. It was the despair of being trapped, of knowing her life had been reduced to this endless cycle of fear and submission. Suddenly, a small sound pulled her out of her thoughts, a soft knock on the back door. Bella froze, her heart racing. Had Richard come back? No, it wasn't possible. He never used that door. She stood up slowly and walked toward the back of the house, her steps light on the wooden floor. When she opened the door, she found herself face to face with Elsa, her neighbor. Elsa was a woman her age, always kind and concerned, but with a troubled look that said it all. Bella knew that Elsa had noticed the deterioration in her life, but they had never openly talked about it. Bella, can I come in? Elsa asked softly, her gaze full of concern. I need to talk to you. Bella nodded, opening the door a little wider to let her in. Elsa stepped inside, casting a nervous glance down the hallway, making sure Richard wasn't home. "I know what's going on," Elsa said as soon as they sat down in the small kitchen. "I hear the shouting, the insults. Bella, I can't keep ignoring it. You can't keep living like this." Bella felt her eyes fill with tears, but she held them back. She had learned not to cry, at least not in front of anyone. "There's nothing you can do, Elsa," she whispered. "Richard, he controls everything. If I try to leave, he'll find me. If I call Lisbeth, he'll know. I have no way out." Elsa looked at her firmly. "That's not true, Bella. I've been in contact with Lisbeth. I told her what's going on." Bella looked at her in horror. "What have you done?" "What had to be done," Elsa replied, her voice resolute. "Lisbeth is on her way. And this time, he won't be able to block her. She's coming with help with the police. You're not alone." Elsa's words hit Bella with a mix of hope and terror. Her daughter was coming back after so many years of forced silence, but the fear of Richard's retaliation still loomed large. What if he finds out? What if it all gets worse? Bella murmured, unable to hold back the tears now. Elsa took her hand, squeezing it tightly. "It's not going to get worse. It's over. We're getting you out of here." Bella sat in silence, taking in what she had just heard. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of hope, though it was still buried under layers of fear. Lisbeth was on her way, and with her, perhaps the end of her nightmare. The kitchen door closed softly after Elsa left, leaving Bella alone once more in the silence of the house. But now, that silence wasn't as oppressive. There was something else in the air, the promise that change was near. The next day, the gray sky mirrored Bella's mood as she sat by her bedroom window, watching the rain fall slowly over the garden. The day had dawned with a heaviness she couldn't shake. Elsa's words from the night before still echoed in her mind. Lisbeth was on her way. Bella felt a confusing mix of relief and fear, as if she were about to cross a threshold from which there was no return. Richard had left early that morning, issuing the same veiled threats and orders before leaving. But this time, his departure didn't bring the same oppressive silence. Instead, Bella felt a vibrant energy of anticipation. She knew her daughter would be home soon, along with 2 police officers, just as Elsa had promised. After years of isolation, of suffering and enduring in silence, the end of this nightmare seemed closer than she had ever imagined. The wait was unbearable. The minutes stretched on, and with each one, her fear grew. What if Richard returned before Lisbeth arrived? What if everything ended worse than it had begun? But most of all, Bella couldn't stop wondering how Lisbeth would react upon seeing the real situation. Her daughter hadn't seen her in a long time, and Bella knew she had changed, not just in appearance, but in spirit as well. As she pondered all this, the sound of a car parking in front of the house made her heart skip a beat. It could be Richard, or maybe, finally, it was Lisbeth. With trembling hands, Bella slowly descended the stairs, leaning on the railing to keep from falling. As she approached the door, she heard a soft knock. She took a deep breath and, for a moment, closed her eyes as if preparing for what was to come. When she opened the door, there was her daughter, Lisbeth, her face full of concern and determination. Beside her, 2 police officers were watching the house attentively. "Mom," Lisbeth murmured, almost out of breath at the sight of her. Bella barely recognized the expression in her daughter's eyes, a mix of love and contained desperation. It had been so long since they had seen each other, so long without hearing her voice directly. Now, seeing her at the door, all the emotions she had kept locked away for years exploded. "Lisbeth," Bella said, her voice broken by the sobs she'd been holding back. She couldn't say more. They threw themselves into each other's arms, and in that moment, all the accumulated pain poured out in their embrace. Bella felt something break inside her, a deep crack that, over time, might begin to heal. Lisbeth held her mother tightly, noticing how fragile she had become, how emaciated she looked. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I had no idea how bad things were. I tried to call you so many times, but Richard always blocked everything. It's not your fault. Bella responded through her sobs, her voice barely audible. Richard, he wouldn't let me. I needed you so much, Lisbeth, but I couldn't do anything. Lisbeth pressed her lips together, holding back her own anger and frustration. She pulled back slightly and looked her mother in the eyes. Mom, we're here to take you away from this. The police will help us. You don't have to endure any of this anymore. One of the police officers, who had been watching the scene respectfully, approached gently. Mrs. Bella, we've received a report of abuse and we've come to make sure you're safe. Is there anything you need right now? Is your husband at home? Bella shook her head, her eyes filled with fear, but also a new glimmer of hope. No, he's not. But he'll come. He always comes back. The other officer, a man with a firm but kind voice, added, We'll stay here until he does. Don't worry. We'll make sure he can't harm you. Bella nodded, unsure of what to say. All of this was so new to her, being surrounded by people willing to help, having Lisbeth by her side again. It was as if, after years of darkness, a small light had begun to shine around her. Mom, Lisbeth said softly, taking her hand. I want you to tell me everything. What he's done to you, what you've had to endure. I need to know. Bella looked into her daughter's eyes with a mix of pain and relief. The time had come to speak, to bring out everything she had kept silent for so long. They sat together in the living room while the police kept a discreet watch near the door. It's been hard, my dear, Bella began, her voice trembling. At first, it wasn't so bad. Richard just controlled me a little. He insisted on managing my money, on making decisions for me. But then it got worse. He started insulting me, telling me I was a burden, that I was useless. Every time I tried to talk to you or do something for myself, he would threaten me. He said that if I ever contacted you or tried to leave, he would hurt me. And I was scared. Lisbeth squeezed her mother's hand, her eyes filled with unshed tears. Mom, you shouldn't have gone through this alone. I would have come back sooner if I had known. I know, dear. But he always made me believe I had nowhere to go. He had so much control over me that I forgot who I was. I became a prisoner in my own home. Lisbeth couldn't help but let a few tears fall. There was so much guilt and sadness inside her. She knew it wasn't her fault, but she couldn't stop thinking about all the years her mother had been alone, suffering in silence. All because of Richard's manipulation. This is over, Lisbeth said, her voice filled with determination. You'll never be alone again. We're going to get you out of here and make sure Richard pays for what he's done to you. Bella nodded slowly, feeling the weight of all those promises. She knew the path to freedom wouldn't be easy, but having Lisbeth by her side gave her a strength she hadn't felt in years. As time passed, Bella found the words to tell her daughter everything she had endured, the abuse, the isolation, the humiliation. Suddenly, a familiar and feared sound for both broke the calm of the moment, the loud noise of the front door being abruptly opened. Richard had returned. Bella's face tightened, and Lisbeth squeezed her hand firmly, giving her the support she needed. The two police officers exchanged quick glances and stood up, ready to intervene. Richard walked into the living room, not yet noticing the presence of the officers. When he saw Lisbeth sitting next to his mother, his eyes flared with rage. What the hell are you doing here? He spat, taking a step toward Lisbeth. His tone was full of hate and disdain. I'm here to protect Mom from you, Lisbeth responded, standing to face him. It's over, Richard. You no longer have power over her. Richard froze for a second, surprised by his sister's firm response, but then his expression changed to one of mockery. He didn't realize the seriousness of the situation. Protect her? You have no idea what you're talking about. This is my house. Mom is mine. Everything she has belongs to me. The police officers stepped forward, placing themselves between Richard and Lisbeth. The tone in the room shifted quickly. One of the officers, with a firm voice, said, Richard, we've received reports of abuse. We'll need to ask you some questions, and you'll need to come with us. Richard looked at the police, his mocking expression slowly fading as reality set in. His world, his control over Bella, was starting to crumble. Bella watched everything from the couch, her heart racing. She knew this was just the beginning, but for the first time in a long while, she felt there was a real chance to break free from her son's grip. The confrontation had begun, and this time, Bella wasn't alone. Bella's house was completely silent after the initial confrontation. Richard, visibly nervous and increasingly tense, refused to accept what was happening. His usual arrogance had been replaced by a mixture of contained fury and panic. The two police officers watched him closely, ready to act if necessary. "You have no right to be here," Richard said, his voice breaking, trying to regain his usual tone of control. "This is my house, my family. You don't know what you're talking about." Lisbeth, standing beside her mother, looked at him with a firmness Richard hadn't seen in years. Her presence there, with the two police officers by her side, had weakened the control he had exerted for so long. The power he had used to subdue Bella now seemed to be slowly slipping away, and that terrified him. "Richard, this is over," Lisbeth said, her voice firm but not shouting, with the calm of someone who knows the truth is on their side. "You've abused Mom for years, and I'm not going to let it continue. The police are here to make sure you don't hurt her anymore." Richard let out a bitter laugh, though his face showed traces of worry. "Hurt? Me? I've always taken care of Mom." "What do you think, Lisbeth? That you can show up after years and know what's going on here? You have no idea." One of the police officers stepped forward, interrupting Richard's speech. "Richard, we've received several reports, and the signs of abuse are clear. This isn't just about what you say. We need you to cooperate with us. You don't want things to get more complicated than necessary." Richard remained silent for a moment, his gaze bouncing between Lisbeth and the police officers as if looking for an escape. He knew his control over Bella was crumbling, and for the first time, he seemed to have no clear plan. The silence in the room became thick, heavy with tension. As Richard struggled internally, Bella, who had remained silent until then, lifted her head. It was time to break the silence she had kept for so many years. She looked at her son, whom she had raised and loved, and felt a deep sadness. But she also knew that to save herself, she had to face him. "Richard," she said, her voice weak but clear, "this isn't living. I can't go on living like this, afraid of you, afraid of what you'll do every time you walk through that door. It's not normal for a son to treat his mother the way you've treated me." Lisbeth squeezed her hand, giving her strength. Bella took a deep breath, feeling that every word she said was a step towards her freedom. "You've isolated me from everything and everyone," Bella continued, her voice trembling but firm. "You control my money, my movements, my calls to Lisbeth. You don't let me see the light of day. I'm not the woman I used to be, and you know it. You made me believe I had no way out, but today I know I do. Today I'm here with my daughter, and I won't let you hurt me anymore." Richard looked at her in disbelief, his breathing quickening. The woman he had controlled for years was now standing up to him, and it bewildered him. He took a step forward, but one of the police officers raised a hand, signaling him to stop. "We're going to need you to come with us," said the officer in an authoritative tone. "We'll need to ask you some more questions, and it's better if you cooperate if you want this to be resolved peacefully." Richard opened his mouth to protest, but something in his expression changed. He knew that, for now, he had lost control. However, he wasn't the kind of person to accept defeat easily. "This isn't over," Richard muttered, his cold gaze fixed on Lisbeth. There was a silent threat in his words, but Lisbeth didn't flinch. "No, Richard. What isn't over is your abuse. But that ends today," Lisbeth responded, with the same firmness as before. The police officers led Richard to the door, while he continued to mutter, trying to find some way to regain his power. Bella watched them from the doorway, her eyes filled with tears, but not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of liberation. For the first time in years, she felt the weight on her shoulders beginning to lift. When the door closed behind Richard and the police, Bella collapsed onto the couch. The silence he had left behind was no longer oppressive. It was a different silence, a silence of peace. Lisbeth knelt in front of her, holding her hands. "You did it, Mom. You finally spoke." You finally freed yourself from him. Bella looked into her eyes with a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. I don't know what I would have done without you, Lisbeth. I felt trapped, like there was no hope left. Lisbeth shook her head gently. It was never too late, Mom. It never will be. Now your new life begins. The days that followed were full of changes. Richard was formally arrested, and although Lisbeth knew the legal process would be long and complex, there was a sense of justice in the air. Bella began receiving regular visits from a social worker, someone who helped her reorganize her life, to remember what it was like to have freedom. Lisbeth decided to stay with her mother. The time they had spent apart had been too much, and neither of them wanted that to happen again. The conversations that used to be painful were now moments of healing. Bella shared with her daughter the details of years of suffering, while Lisbeth listened attentively and patiently. One day, while the two of them were having tea in the garden, a small luxury Bella had regained, the conversation took a softer tone. Do you think I'll ever be able to get over all of this? Bella asked, looking at the flowers that were blooming again after so much neglect. Lisbeth looked at her with a warm smile. You've already overcome it, Mom. You've taken the hardest step. Now it's just about moving forward, about remembering who you are. Bella nodded, though it was still hard for her to imagine a life without the chains Richard had placed on her. But she knew that, in time, she would learn to live again, to smile without fear. A few weeks later, the day of the trial arrived. Bella, accompanied by Lisbeth and Elsa, walked into the courtroom with her head held high. She was no longer the submissive and scared woman she had been. She knew that this moment would be difficult, but she also knew it was necessary. She would face Richard, and this time not with fear, but with the truth. When Richard was brought to the stand, he tried to defend himself, to justify himself. But the evidence was clear. Bella's testimony, filled with heartbreaking details about years of abuse, was enough to tip the scales. The judge found Richard guilty of physical and psychological abuse, and his sentence was a clear signal that justice had finally come for Bella. The end of that nightmare was not just Richard's conviction, but also the beginning of a new life for Bella. The freedom she had longed for was now hers. And as she walked out of the courthouse, with Lisbeth by her side, she knew that her life story wasn't over, but that a new chapter was just beginning. A chapter of hope, of rebuilding, and of love. The morning sun illuminated the small living room where Bella and Lisbeth were sitting. It had been a few weeks since the trial, and although Richard's sentence had brought relief, emotions were still fresh, like wounds just beginning to heal. Bella, holding a cup of tea, gazed out the window at the garden. It was a bright day, but inside her, the clouds of her past had not fully cleared. Lisbeth, sitting across from her mother, noticed the change in her. Bella looked calmer, though still fragile. The internal struggle she had fought for years would not disappear overnight. Lisbeth knew that although her mother had taken the hardest step, recovery would be a slow process. Mom, how are you feeling today? Lisbeth asked gently, breaking the silence. Bella turned away from the window and looked at her daughter, a faint smile on her lips. I feel different, she said, with a sincerity she hadn't shown before. It's like, after so long, I can finally breathe. But I also feel scared, Lisbeth. Scared because I don't know what to do with my life now that Richard is gone. Lisbeth nodded, fully understanding her mother's feelings. She had been a prisoner for so long that now freedom felt strange, even frightening. That's normal, Mom. You've been through so much, and no one expects everything to be fixed overnight. What matters is that you're here, and you have a new chance. But you need to give yourself time. It's a process. Bella sighed, nodding slowly. I know. It's just that there are days when I feel so lost. I feel like I've spent so many years living a life that wasn't mine, that I don't know how to recover the woman I used to be. You don't have to be the same woman, Lisbeth said, smiling tenderly. You can be whoever you want to be now. You can build a new life, one that makes you happy. Bella looked at her for a moment, feeling a small spark of hope ignite within her. She knew Lisbeth was right, but the fear was still a constant companion. Richard had made her believe that she couldn't do anything without him, that she was worthless on her own, and even though she was now free, those scars would take time to heal. "I want to try," Bella said in a soft voice. "I want to learn to live without fear, but I don't know where to start." Lisbeth took her mother's hand and squeezed it lovingly. "We'll start little by little, Mom. You don't have to do it alone. I'm here with you, and we'll go through this together." A few days later, Lisbeth began taking her mother on short walks around the neighborhood, something Bella hadn't done in years. The outside world felt both familiar and unfamiliar. Every step outside the house was a victory for her, but it also reminded her of how much she had lost. The streets she once walked with confidence now felt uncertain, and the gazes of others sometimes made her uncomfortable. She knew that some neighbors were aware of her story, and although she received kind smiles, she couldn't help but feel ashamed. One day, during one of these walks, they ran into Elsa, the neighbor who had been instrumental in Bella's rescue. Elsa greeted them warmly, but with the delicacy of someone who understands another's pain. "Bella, Lisbeth," Elsa said, smiling as she approached. "It's so nice to see you two together." Bella smiled, though a bit shyly. "Thank you, Elsa. I don't know how to thank you for everything you did for me." "You don't have to thank me for anything, Bella," Elsa replied, with a firm yet gentle look. "I just wanted to see you well. You did the hardest part, which was finding the courage to say enough." Bella lowered her gaze, still processing those words. It was hard for her to see herself as brave. For so long, she had felt that bravery was out of reach. But here she was, standing, walking beside her daughter, with life ahead of her. Elsa, aware of Bella's discomfort, changed the subject. "We've been organizing a small gathering at the neighborhood park. Just some neighbors and friends. Nothing formal, but I thought you might like to come. It'll be a good time to reconnect." Bella felt overwhelmed by the invitation. The idea of being surrounded by so many people, of being the center of attention and comments, frightened her. But before she could decline, Lisbeth gave her a gentle squeeze on the arm. "We could go, Mom. Just for a while. You don't have to stay long if you're not comfortable." Bella hesitated, but finally nodded. She knew it was important to take small steps toward her new life, even if those steps were hard. The day of the gathering arrived, and Bella, nervous, put on one of her best dresses. Though the park was just a few blocks from her house, the walk seemed much longer than it really was. Lisbeth, as always, was by her side, silently supporting her. When they arrived, several neighbors came over to greet them. The kind smiles and supportive gestures helped Bella begin to relax. The conversations were light, full of neighborhood anecdotes, and for the first time in a long while, Bella felt included. She wasn't the broken woman Richard had made everyone believe she was. She was Bella, Lisbeth's mother, the strong woman who had survived hell. At one point, while talking with Elsa and other neighbors, Bella realized something important. The fear she had felt for so long wasn't insurmountable. It was still there, yes, but it no longer controlled her. She was surrounded by people who loved her, who supported her, and that gave her a strength she hadn't felt in years. "Bella, it's good to see you smile," Elsa said, watching her warmly. Bella nodded, smiling shyly. "It feels good to be here. And this is where you belong," Elsa responded firmly. "You're part of this community, and we're happy to have you back." That afternoon, as they walked home, Bella felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. She knew the path to her recovery would be long, but now she felt that she wasn't walking it alone. At home, while Lisbeth prepared dinner, Bella stared at the photo of her late husband on the mantel. His absence had been another pain she had dealt with in silence, and although she had always imagined they would live out their last years together, she now knew that her life would take a different path. "I hope you're proud of me," Bella whispered, speaking to the portrait. For the first time, she felt she was beginning to honor her own life, not just the memory of her husband or the wishes of her son. When Lisbeth came over to call her to dinner, Bella looked at her and smiled. "Thank you for not letting me fall." Lisbeth hugged her, knowing that smile meant more than words could express. She knew her mother was being reborn, slowly, but with a strength even Bella didn't know she had. That night's dinner was quiet, filled with small conversations and shared moments. Bella's life had changed, but the love and support from Lisbeth were helping her find her way to a new normal. And in that moment, Bella knew that although there were still difficult days ahead, she was on the right path to healing and peace. The weeks passed with an unexpected calm for Bella. She had begun to get used to the new routine, walks with Lisbeth, afternoons spent talking in the garden, and the peace she felt knowing that Richard was no longer a part of her life. However, even though she enjoyed these moments, the feeling that something inside her was still unresolved kept her awake at night. That morning, Bella woke up before the sun rose, unable to fall back asleep. Sitting at the small kitchen table, she slowly sipped a cup of coffee, her thoughts drifting to the years she had lost, trapped in a life that wasn't hers. Lisbeth appeared a little later, noticing the distant look in her mother's eyes. She had learned to read the signs, knew when Bella was dealing with memories of the past. With a gentle smile, she approached and sat next to her. "Mom, you seem distracted. What are you thinking about?" Lisbeth asked, trying to open the conversation with the same delicacy as always. Bella remained silent for a moment, watching the steam rise from her cup before answering. "I'm thinking about everything that happened, Lisbeth. About everything I lost, and everything I'm never going to get back." "I know it hurts, Mom," Lisbeth said, gently taking Bella's hand. "But what matters is what you're getting back now. You've been incredibly strong. Not everyone could have survived what you went through." Bella sighed, feeling the weight of her daughter's words, which were sincere but didn't fully ease the guilt she carried. "I don't feel strong, Lisbeth. I feel like all I did was survive. And in that process, I forgot who I was, who I wanted to be." Lisbeth stayed quiet, observing her mother's face. She knew she couldn't rush her through her healing process. Each day was a small step forward, but there were also days when Bella took steps back, and Lisbeth understood that those days were part of recovery. "Mom," Lisbeth began, trying to offer a new perspective. "Surviving isn't a small thing. You endured something that many people couldn't handle. That doesn't make you weak, quite the opposite. And now, you have the chance to be whoever you want to be." Bella nodded, though still with that hidden sadness in her eyes. "I know, but there are days when it feels like the opportunity came too late." Lisbeth leaned towards her mother with the warmth and firmness that defined her. "It's never too late. And you don't have to do it all alone. I'm here and I always will be. We'll move forward together." That day, while Lisbeth worked from home, Bella decided to take a walk alone around the neighborhood. It was a small challenge for her after so long feeling like a prisoner in her own home. But now, each step was a declaration of her newfound freedom. As she walked through the streets, greeting a few neighbors, her thoughts inevitably returned to Richard. How had she allowed her own son to take so much from her? The question haunted her continuously. She knew it wasn't her fault, but the memory still had the power to drag her into a pit of doubt and sadness. She passed by Elsa's house, and the neighbor came out to greet her with a warm smile, as if she always knew when Bella needed company. "Bella, it's so nice to see you around," Elsa said, approaching the door. "Would you like some coffee? I was just about to make some." Bella, who would normally have declined, decided to accept the invitation. Maybe talking with Elsa would help her sort out her thoughts. They sat in Elsa's small garden where the flowers were beginning to bloom with the first signs of spring. The atmosphere was relaxed and Bella felt a little calmer. Elsa watched her with the wisdom of someone who had seen many things in life and understood that wounds didn't heal overnight. "How have you been feeling, Bella?" Elsa asked as she poured the coffee. "You should know that what you did, standing up to Richard, was the bravest thing I've ever seen." Bella smiled sadly. "I don't feel brave, Elsa. Sometimes I wonder if all of this was my fault, if I did something to make things end the way they did." Elsa quickly shook her head, not allowing those words to take hold. "No, Bella. You can't let yourself think that way. What Richard did to you is cruel and unjust. No mother deserves to be treated like that. What he did doesn't define who you are." Bella nodded, though her doubts still lingered. "Thank you, Elsa. But there are days when I can't help but feel responsible. It's hard to change so many years of thinking like that." Elsa looked at her with tenderness, but with the firmness that only a true friend offers in times of need. Bella, what matters now is how you move forward. You survived hell, and now you have the chance to bloom again. Life doesn't end because someone tried to destroy it. You're still here, and as long as you are, you can change things. Bella sighed, recognizing the truth in Elsa's words. She knew this path wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she had the support of people who loved her and believed in her, even on the days when she couldn't believe in herself. That night, as she sat in the living room with Lisbeth, Bella began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time, the need to do something for herself. For years, her life had been completely under Richard's control, and before that, consumed by the responsibilities of home and raising her children. But now, with her newfound freedom, she realized she wanted to rediscover who she was, beyond being a mother and a victim. "Lisbeth," Bella said suddenly, breaking the silence in the room. "I've been thinking. I'd like to start doing something for myself. Something that reminds me of who I am." Lisbeth looked up from the book she was reading with a gentle smile. "That sounds wonderful, Mom. Do you have something in mind?" Bella stayed quiet for a moment, reflecting. "I used to love gardening. It was something I did with your father. After he died, and then with everything that happened with Richard, I stopped doing it. But now, I'd like to try it again." Lisbeth smiled broadly, her eyes glowing with pride. "That's an excellent idea, Mom. We can start organizing the garden tomorrow if you'd like." Bella nodded, feeling a spark of excitement she hadn't felt in years. "Yes, I'd like that." That decision, though small, marked a new beginning for Bella. It was a symbol that, little by little, she was regaining control of her life, her passions, and her identity. The next day, Bella and Lisbeth spent hours in the garden, pulling weeds, planting new flowers, and restoring the old flower beds that had been neglected for so long. For Bella, it was more than just an activity. It was an act of rediscovery, a statement that her life, her world, could bloom once more. As she dug into the soil and felt the sun on her skin, Bella realized that the sadness was still there, but it no longer held the same power over her. Each time a new plant found its place in the ground, she felt that something inside her was also being renewed. And so, as the garden began to transform, Bella did too. She was planting the seeds of her new life, one that would grow with time, patience, and love. And although she knew there were still obstacles ahead, for the first time in years, she felt that she was on the right path to a life where she could be truly free. The days had become lighter for Bella. The garden, once a place abandoned and withered, now bloomed with vibrant and lively colors. The rose bushes were blooming again, fresh herbs grew in the shade of the trees, and Bella found a small respite in tending to the plants. For her, the garden represented a kind of redemption, an opportunity to heal through something so simple yet so full of life. Lisbeth, watching her mother from the door of the house, couldn't help but smile. Seeing Bella working in the garden with dirt-stained hands, her hair tied back, and a peaceful expression on her face was a change she hadn't imagined possible just a few months ago. They had come a long way, but there was still something in her mother's fragility that worried her. Although Bella's strength was being restored, Lisbeth knew that the healing process wasn't linear. That afternoon, as Bella watered the plants, Lisbeth approached her with a cup of tea in hand. The sun was starting to set, casting a warm golden glow over the garden. "Mom," Lisbeth said, handing her the cup. "The garden looks beautiful. It's like everything here is reflecting what you've been achieving." Bella smiled as she took the tea and sat on a bench under the rose bush. There was something deeply therapeutic about the garden, something that allowed her, at least for a moment, to forget the dark years she had lived under Richard's control. "It's a good start," Bella replied, with a gentle smile. "It's been so long since I felt like this, Lisbeth. Like I have control over something in my life." Lisbeth sat down next to her mother, noticing the change in her demeanor. "You've done an incredible job, Mom. Not just with the garden, but with everything you've had to face. I'm so proud of you." Bella placed the cup down on the table and, after a sigh, looked at her daughter with tenderness. "I couldn't have done it without you. If you hadn't come that day, I don't know where I'd be now." Lisbeth took her mother's hand and squeezed it gently. We're here together. That's what matters now. But Mom, I also want you to know that it's okay to have hard days. You don't always have to be strong. Bella nodded, grateful for her daughter's words. There were days when she felt the weight of the past still crushing her, but now, at least, she knew she wasn't alone on this journey. She had a support network that helped her remember that her life, though marked by pain, could also be full of light. Today is a good day, Bella finally said, letting her gaze rest on the flowers swaying gently in the breeze. But I know I still have a lot to face. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be able to leave behind everything I lived through with Richard. The scars, they're still there. Lisbeth nodded, understanding. Those scars won't go away, Mom. But what will change is the way you see them. Over time, you'll learn to see them not as marks of pain, but as reminders of how strong you are. They don't define you, but they're part of your story. And your story isn't over. Bella let those words sink in. She had spent so long feeling defined by suffering that the idea of being more than that still felt strange. But now, sitting next to Lisbeth, watching her garden thrive, she was beginning to understand that her life could be something more. However, that same afternoon, as Lisbeth and Bella relaxed in the garden, unexpected news reached Lisbeth's ears. Richard had filed an appeal. The defense attorney had managed to get the case reviewed, and though the chances of reducing the sentence were slim, the news hit like a bomb in the peaceful life they had been building. Lisbeth learned about it first. The fear that Richard might return or that the appeal might give him more control over her mother shook her. She knew she had to be strong for Bella, but her mind couldn't stop thinking about the what-ifs. As she entered the house, Lisbeth paused, taking a deep breath before approaching her mother. She didn't know how to tell her without undoing all the progress Bella had made. Mom, I need to talk to you, Lisbeth said softly but seriously, as Bella returned from putting away the gardening tools. Of course, sweetheart. What is it? Bella replied, her expression calm. Lisbeth felt the knot in her throat tighten. They sat in the living room, with the light from the garden streaming through the windows. Lisbeth took a moment to find the right words, but she finally decided to be honest. I got a call this afternoon. It's about Richard. His lawyer has filed an appeal to reduce his sentence. Bella's face immediately tensed. The fear she had tried to control for so long returned to her face like a cold shadow. Even though she knew Richard was still in prison, the mere thought that he might be trying to regain his freedom terrified her. What does that mean? Bella asked, trying to stay calm, but the tremble in her voice was evident. I'm not sure what might happen, Mom. The appeal process is complicated, but I want you to know we're doing everything we can to make sure it doesn't succeed. We won't let him hurt you again. Bella sat in silence, letting her daughter's words hang in the air. The sense of security she had been building seemed to crumble at the mere mention of Richard. Even though he wasn't physically there, his shadow still had the power to scare her. I don't want to go through that again, Lisbeth, Bella whispered, lowering her gaze. I don't know if I can bear it again. Lisbeth took her hands, squeezing them tightly. You won't have to, Mom. You're not alone. You have the lawyers, your friends, and me. And we won't let him back into your life. Bella took a deep breath, feeling a mix of emotions inside her. The fragility she had begun to leave behind was creeping back, but there was something different this time. She had Lisbeth. She had a support network she didn't have before. She was no longer the same woman Richard had abused. Even though she was still afraid, she also knew that now she had a voice, and she wasn't going to let it be silenced again. Thank you, sweetheart, she said finally, her voice trembling but firm. I know I can't stop what's happening, but I'm glad I don't have to face it alone. Lisbeth hugged her, giving Bella the support she needed at that moment. The fear of what Richard might do was still there, but now Bella knew that her strength wasn't in facing it alone, but in the people who surrounded her. And that night, as she got ready for bed, Bella looked out the window toward the garden. The fear was still there, but so was life. The garden was a metaphor for her own healing process, something that needed time, dedication, and above all, patience. Storms would come, like the news of Richard's appeal, but there was also light. And that light, the hope of a free life, was something that neither Richard nor anyone else could take away from her. Bella closed her eyes, feeling the calm that sleep brought. The battle wasn't over, but this time she was ready to face it, with her daughter by her side and the love that kept them united, stronger than any shadow from the past. The air in the courtroom was thick, filled with a tension that everyone present could feel. Richard's appeal hearing had dragged on longer than expected, and now, after days of uncertainty, the room waited nervously for the final verdict. Bella sat next to Lisbeth in the front row, their hands clasped together, her body fragile, but her spirit stronger than ever. She had come so far, survived so much. Now, there was only this last step. The judge entered the room, and immediately, a blanket of silence fell over the crowd. Richard, who up until that moment had maintained an arrogant and defiant posture, now seemed uneasy. The days of his absolute control over Bella were long gone, but that didn't stop his presence from sending a shiver of fear through her. However, when Lisbeth squeezed her hand, Bella remembered how far she had come. She was no longer the terrified woman she used to be. The court has reviewed all the evidence presented, both in the original trial and this appeal, the judge began, his voice resonating through the room. And after a thorough analysis, we have reached a verdict. Bella's heart pounded. She felt like all the air had stopped in her lungs. This was the moment that would define everything. The request for sentence reduction is denied, the judge declared firmly. The defendant, Richard Stevens, will serve his full sentence for prolonged physical and psychological abuse. The echo of those words filled the room, but most importantly, it filled Bella's heart with freedom. Richard would not be released. He would not come back to invade her life. The shadow that had followed her for so long was finally fading. She turned to Lisbeth, who looked at her with tears in her eyes, and for the first time in years, Bella felt the weight she had carried on her shoulders had finally been lifted. Richard, on the other hand, remained silent. His face no longer showed the same contempt as before, but something darker, defeat. He knew he had lost, not only his appeal but the control he had exercised over his mother for so long. The guards took him by the arms to escort him out of the room, but not before he cast one last look at Bella. It wasn't the furious glare she had expected to see, it was the look of someone realizing, perhaps for the first time, that their power had evaporated. Bella watched him for a moment, and though the fear still lingered in the deepest corners of her being, a new feeling replaced it. It wasn't hatred, it wasn't resentment. It was the certainty that Richard no longer defined her. He was no longer part of her life, and he never would be again. Lisbeth hugged her mother tightly. "We did it, Mom. This is the end. You're free now." Bella nodded, closing her eyes as she allowed herself to cry, but not out of sadness. They were tears of relief, gratitude, and above all, peace. She knew the road to rebuilding her life hadn't been easy, and there was still much to do, but for the first time in years, she felt she could look toward the future with hope. Weeks later, Bella's life had begun to take on a new shape. The garden, which had been her refuge, was now a place of celebration. The flowers bloomed with an intensity that reflected the rebirth Bella had experienced. She had spent hours working in it, not only as a form of therapy, but as a way to express her newfound freedom. Every plant that grew, every flower that opened its petals, was a reminder of her strength. Lisbeth was beside her that afternoon, as on so many others, helping her plant new seeds. The sun was beginning to set, bathing the garden in a warm golden light. Bella, covered in dirt up to her elbows, couldn't help but smile. "I never thought I'd feel this at peace," Bella said, looking at her daughter. "After everything that happened, there were times I didn't think I'd survive. But here we are." Lisbeth smiled, proud of her mother's strength. It had been a long and painful journey, but also one filled with growth and redemption. "And the best part is that now you have the chance to live the way you always should have, Mom," Lisbeth replied, dropping a few seeds into the soil. "Without fear, with complete freedom." Bella nodded, her eyes shining with contained emotion. She knew Lisbeth was right. The ghosts of the past no longer haunted her, and though she couldn't erase the years of suffering, she had learned to reconcile with them. She knew those scars would always be there, but they no longer defined her. "I've been thinking a lot about that," Bella said, smoothing the soil with her hands. "About how I want to live from now on. And I think I want to do more than just work in the garden." Lisbeth looked at her, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" Bella paused for a moment before responding. "I want to help other women who've gone through what I did. I want to use my story to show them that there's a way out, that they're not alone." Lisbeth looked at her with admiration, but also with deep emotion. She knew how difficult it must have been for her mother to come to that decision. She wasn't just facing her past, but transforming it into something that could change other people's lives. "That's amazing, Mom. I'm sure so many women would be inspired by your strength." Bella smiled, though a little shyly. She knew it wouldn't be easy to relive those memories to help others, but she also knew it was the right thing to do. She had found her voice, and now she wanted to use it to help others find theirs. And that night, after dinner, Bella sat on the porch, looking up at the starry sky. For the first time in a long while, her life was at peace. There were no more shadows from the past haunting her, no more fear of what was to come. Richard was behind her, and now the future stretched out before her like an open field, full of possibilities. Lisbeth stepped out onto the porch and sat next to her mother in silence. Both of them looked at the sky, enjoying the shared calm. They knew life wouldn't be perfect, that there would still be challenges ahead, but now they had something they had been missing for so long: hope. "Thank you for not letting me fall," Bella said, breaking the silence. Lisbeth smiled, looking at her mother with all the love and pride in the world. "Thank you for finding the strength to get back up, Mom." And there, under the starry sky, Bella knew that she had finally found what she had always longed for, a life in which she, and only she, was in control. A free life, a life full of love, and above all, a life where every day was a new opportunity to keep growing and flourishing. The past was left behind, and the future, for the first time in a long while, was completely hers. The garden she had planted in her heart now bloomed stronger than ever. What did you think of this story? Tell us in the comments. What would you do in a similar situation? We invite you to like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your friends or family as a show of support. This motivates us to keep posting exciting stories almost every day. Don't miss the next surprising narrative that is about to appear on your screen. We greatly value having you here with us. You can click on the links that are appearing on your screen right now. We have an exclusive selection of captivating stories and guaranteed entertainment just for you. See you in the next video. A big hug.